All right. And here we are for a book think number 6. And today I got a very special guest, Joanna from Joanna's YouTube channel, or Joanna Reads, right?
Joanna
Um,
reads or Joanna, yeah.
yeah. And for those few people out there who might not know about your channel, could you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure, yeah. My channel is basically about the books I read. I also have a Why Read discussion series where I like to invite guests to explain what inspires them to pick up a book rather than any other pastime. And I also do book topic videos as well.
Yep.
So lots of stuff happening over on the channel. It's a lot of fun. So
Yep. And I gotta say, your channel is one of the inspirations that made me stop my own. Because when I first got on BookTube, it was you were one of the first ones that I've encountered because I liked your style and your book reviews, and so I appreciate your channel a lot.
aw,
And
thank you so much. I'm so honored. I didn't know that.
and so, like my previous two guests, you chose to surprise me with a choice to talk about today. And I love that because I like being surprised. And so you chose Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. And you have a physical copy of there, I see. I read mine on Kindle, so my 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 copy was this one here, if you can
Ah,
see that on the screen. Yeah,
mhm.
and so for this occasion, I got my fishing hat here. I
Are you a fisher?
I am not,
Okay.
but
That
but
would have been funny.
I have that sitting around from one of my old birthday parties. But um, but I gotta say, I was surprised by this choice because we don't really talk about contemporary literature that much on BookTube that often. You know, you see one here and there, and I know we talk a lot about fantasy and sci-fi, and so this was interesting that this was the choice for this episode. Um, and I have read some Hemingway before, um, and I'm kind of curious if you've read any Hemingway other than this before.
I actually have not. This was my introduction to Hemingway, and it's a
Oh,
book that
okay.
I've been meaning to get to for a very long time. So I actually meant to get to this last year and then just couldn't quite fit it in. So I just got to it. Like I
Yeah.
just finished it this morning. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was the impetus to like read this particular story at this time?
Ah,
Um,
well, good question. So the reason that I picked up this book was actually because of my mother. My mother loves this book. It's one of her
okay.
favorite books of all time. And uh, several years ago now, I want to say it was maybe even 10 years or more, I don't know, a while back, she had gifted a copy to me and to each of my siblings. I'm one of four kids, and she wanted all of us to read it together and to talk about it. We were going to have a little family book club.
Hmm.
And so we all had our copies. We were all excited to talk about it, to read it. And we were all living in different locations at the time. And for whatever reason, it just never happened. Things just kept coming up. It never happened. Last year, my sister broke down and read the book because she visited the Florida Keys and she went to go
Uh,
visit where Hemingway lived. And so she wanted to
oh,
be prepared enough. So she read the book and she enjoyed it. And so I wanted to get to it because my mother also told me that this is a very good lesson in good prose. She's a big believer that Hemingway is a master when it comes to prose. And it was such an important book to her that I wanted to prioritize it. Plus, I also just have been taking an interest over the last few years in nautical fantasy. And
oh,
so I actually had a nautical fantasy or nautical books TBR a long time ago. And this was on the list, and I still hadn't got to it. And then it was on my list for last year, and then I still didn't get to it. So this book has been pushed off for way too long, and I was just tired of it. And I just wanted to get to it already. So
oh,
finally
okay.
got to it.
Well, I'm glad I could help with that.
Yes, thank
Um,
you.
and and okay, so that's basically why now, and I had previously read "For Whom the Bell Tolls"
Oh, okay.
by Hemingway, and this was like, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and I had also read some shorter stories of his in various collections a long time ago. I don't remember which ones though, but this one, this was more about the Spanish Civil War, and I I did find it a little slow and a little bit boring. But I did find his writing to be compelling in other ways. He's very uh, I don't know, he drives the language, and he's very succinct, and he's very um, I don't know. We'll get into that.
That's a really good way of describing it, though.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Mhm.
And but this, of course, this this isn't fantasy per se, although there are some. I think there are some events in this book that kind of push the boundaries of possibility, maybe. But I found that fascinating myself. What this old man was capable of on the sea. So what did you get out of the story as far as that goes?
Yeah, no, so I'll just go ahead and be honest. I didn't feel as emotionally engaged in this story as I had hoped I would, but there were still a lot of things I appreciated in his writing. And then when I went back and reflected on the book and the story and the themes more afterwards, I had a deeper sense of appreciation for what Hemingway was doing, because I think so much of the book is about it's about faith and hope, and it's also about the internal journey and internal values versus the material values and materialism in general, as indicated by the I think the skeleton of the fish, for example, at the end. Are we
Uh,
okay talking about spoilers, by the
yes,
way?
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. People listening, this is spoilers. This is all spoilers. So, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah,
Uh,
so I could break that down even further, but yeah, I mean, just to answer in a very simple way, there were a lot of things he was doing to show this character, to show it not only his faith and his hope, but his resilience and his reverence too. Reverence came out in a big way in this story, and I couldn't help but think of Piranesi. Have you ever read Piranesi by Susanna
I have
Clark?
I have not, no. Uh,
Ah.
but
I
I
highly recommend that book.
oh, yeah.
Uh, but there was something about the way that this character, the way that he revered the sea and the fish that he's struggling with, and
Mhm.
there were so many ways that he looked at obstacles as in such a positive way. He chose love in so many instances, and it reminded
Yep.
me very, very much of that character Piranesi. Because Piranesi, there's also an ocean in that story, and he also has this reverence for everything around him in his world. So I think there's a very strong similarity there, even though the characters are very, very, very different in a lot of
Mhm.
other ways too.
Okay, cool. I was gonna give a little bit of background about when this story was published in 1952 in, so towards the end of his career, uh, even though he had worked on earlier iterations of it, throughout his life. But this was published in, Life magazine, actually, in 1952, first, and then as its own novella, the next year. And it was also kind of highly critically praised when the time it came out, and it was kind of the impetus that led to him getting the Pulitzer Prize in fiction in 53 and the Nobel Prize in literature in 54. Uh, and so this seemed to be like the capstone of his career almost. And I found that information fascinating because he was, already vaunted for his work during the 30s, where he wrote, uh, this book and other ones. And but his previous works prior to this one actually weren't that critically acclaimed, and
Mm.
so that's kind of a nice capstone, I guess, for his the end of his career. Um, but did you find in this, and I know you haven't read Moby Dick, but
No.
I definitely got that feel when
I
I
could
was
see
reading.
that though, because I
Uh,
know about Moby Dick enough.
yeah,
And at the
yeah,
same time, I mean, you could let me know since you've read Moby Dick. Isn't that more about Captain Ahab? Isn't he having like this struggle, like this need to get the whale to,
yeah,
but it doesn't feel the same in the sense that it seems like the whale is more of an more of like, I don't want to say enemy, but he,
yeah. Well,
it's more ego driven in a way. I feel like I don't
yes,
know.
yes, you're right. Moby Dick, Captain Ahab's more ego driven, and it's more how he is throwing everything aside to get
Obsessive.
that
Mhm.
obsessive, unobtainable object, basically. Whereas this fisherman in this story had that need to get this fish, but he also had this immense amount of respect for his where he was, the sea, and for his opponent. And I love that contrast that I got out of it from Moby
Mhm.
Dick. And of course, Hemingway obviously had to be very aware of Moby Dick, but um, I think what he did to turn that away, turn it, make it different from that kind of uh, Moby Dick caricature into a more I think a little bit, I don't want to say deeper message, but a different message than what Moby Dick put out.
Yes, I would say that for the old man, his conflict was that he not only felt the need to kill this fish and to yeah, to win this struggle, but he loved the fish. He respected the fish. He revered the fish. He prayed for the fish. He wanted to be the fish.
Yeah, right.
So you read about his feelings of conflict about that throughout the whole entire thing, and he's even at peace if that fish kills him. So it's very different in that way, and at the same time, it does feel like Hemingway probably did consciously want to contrast this story to Moby Dick. I actually had that thought as well.
Yeah, yeah. That I definitely got that feel from it, and it was and I found that part of it fascinating, but also just the different. You mentioned earlier relationship and his relationship um, to the sea. I think
Yes,
that was, a relationship of love with him, really, and how much he loved the sea. And I was kind of curious because he mentions in some of the relics in his little hut there, and how he hid the photograph of his wife,
oh, yeah.
and because it made him
Made him
lonely.
lonely.
Yeah, it made
Yeah,
him lonely to see that, and I'm wondering if the sea itself is the cure for his loneliness, or was it a continuing cause of his loneliness? Because the sea's so vast, and
that's a very good question because
I had that question. Yeah.
he does personify the sea as being a female, as being
Mhm.
feminine.
Yep.
He calls it la mar, which is the Spanish
Yeah.
term for sea,
Right. Right.
and
Yep.
I know that the sea has historically been personified as being, feminine or being yeah, for like being representative of femininity and also chaos, and not necessarily in the most positive way, but he has reverence for the sea also. So, he I think explains that too at one point, doesn't he?
Yeah, I
How some
believe so. Yeah.
people don't look at the sea the same way he does and how he sees it in a positive way. I can't remember
I
the
believe so.
exact line.
I think he does do that, and he mentions that quite a few times, um, about his love for the sea and his respect for it and his reverence for it, and it's almost a religious feeling for him, um,
Yes.
him being out on that. on that ocean and doing what he does. And and I know there's some other um, Christian symbology in here, um,
Mhm.
as far as the sea. Did you see any of that as
I
you were
wondered
reading?
about that. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was what came to my mind is the biblical reference of that, and that's really interesting though because I hadn't thought about it as in contrast to his wife. I think that's a very good question, and because I'm flipping to page 50 in my edition right now, and it's talking about like how uh, he's talking about the sea, and he's also wishing that the boy were there. So he's feeling
Yes.
lonely in the sea too.
Yep. Yeah, that was another aspect of his loneliness was that the boy wasn't out there with him.
Mhm.
And even though he completely understood why the boy couldn't go and all that stuff, he constantly wished that the boy was there to help him out. But he says to help him out, but I have a feeling he meant because he was lonely. That's
Yeah.
the feeling I got from the prose, you know.
What I got out of, the whole relationship with the boy, which I guess is actually a young man because he's old enough to buy beer, and
Yeah,
they
right.
mentioned something along those lines, but they keep calling Hemingway refers to him as a boy. I mean,
Yeah.
calls him the boy. So I still pictured him in my head younger than he probably was, but I think that the special thing about the boy and the old man is that to me, I think they instilled hope in one another. And there was even a line and faith too. There was even a line where the boy talks about how his parents he has to do what his parents say, and the old man agrees, and he says that my parents don't see things the way I do, and he said, yeah, they don't have faith, but we have faith, and the boy says, yes, we have faith, and so they instill this faith in each other, and I think it's beautiful because we right away get the sense, without Hemingway overtly saying it, we get the sense that the old man is very poor. He lives
Mhm.
in a small hut that's made of these guana leaves, and he sleeps on newspapers
Yep.
with a rolling up his pants for a pillow. He they talk about and then the way that they talk about things in a way that's very playful and pretend like when
Mhm.
they talk about the food they're gonna make and the nets they're gonna cast, and they actually have no net. They actually don't have this food, and they talk about these things as though but I think it's their way of instilling this hope in each other and this faith in life and this joy in each other, and he sees the man in a very different way than everyone else in the town. It seems as though everyone else in the town almost kind of laughs off this old man who's very poor and lives in this hut, but the boy sees the light in his eyes,
Mhm.
and he asks him about his past adventures and asks him about the sea and the things they can learn together. So I think that they serve a very important purpose for each other. They do the same thing for one another. So I thought that was an important part of the
Yeah,
story as well.
that's a great observation, right? And I like how the yeah, there was a couple times. Oh, I love the interplay of baseball between
Oh,
him
yeah,
and the boy,
DiMaggio and yeah.
and I thought that was there was one section um, where he's talking to the boy, and the boy says, "But I fear the Indians of Cleveland." And he says, "Have faith in the Yankees, my son. Think of the great DiMaggio." And he says, "I fear both the Tigers of Detroit and the Indians of Cleveland." And the old man says, "Be careful, or else you'll fear even the Reds of Cincinnati and the White Sox of Chicago." So it seemed to me that they were kind of listing these fears as kind of a metaphor for all of life's worries, you know? And
Mhm.
they were speaking it in baseball terms, but it was this unspoken, I'm worried about you going out in the ocean by yourself. I'm worried about this, and I'm worried about what you're going to eat next, and I'm worried about, and I just thought that was beautifully done by Hemingway in that instance.
That's perfect, yeah, like, this really good subtext, and
Yeah,
you could tell they're not just talking about baseball
right.
in that
It's
conversation,
yeah.
and and I think there's something to be said about how he's trying to give the boy hope and faith in some in, you know, in DiMaggio, it's almost like hope and faith in himself. I totally I thought that was interesting how he did that. Uh, Also noticing the baseball reference later on, I thought it was interesting when he's describing the fish because he describes it as being 2 feet longer than his skiff, and I know what skiff is now after reading so much Jenny Wirtz and Scott Lynch. I told my husband that, and he said, "What is a skiff?" And I I said, "I think I didn't know that a year ago." But but also that the sword of the fish, which I guess it's a swordfish,
Yeah,
is as
swordfish,
long as a baseball
baseball bat.
bat.
Yep, yep.
And I was thinking, "Wow, so this is actually probably to scale, what you see here in this picture on the
Oh
cover."
yeah, yeah,
Uh, Not
yeah.
exaggerating there.
I know, and it's yeah, and that was so that was we get to that point where he caught the fish,
Oh,
but we
yeah.
haven't seen it yet, and he's like it's like days and days where he's um got a hold of this fish and it's basically dragging him along, and
Mhm.
um I'm just like that was more of the Moby Dick part where he
Hmm.
had this fish and he was either gonna die or else or the fish was gonna die. That was his thoughts. Either the
Yes.
fish is gonna kill him or
And he
he's
was at peace with that, even though he was
yep.
determined. He was gonna be at peace with that. My favorite Do you mind if I read my favorite part of
Oh,
this whole entire
absolutely.
book?
Yep.
This was my favorite part of the whole entire book. It was the part, "The fish is my friend too," he said aloud. "I have never seen or heard of such a fish, but I must kill him. I am glad we do not have to try to kill the stars. Imagine if each day a man must try to kill the moon," he thought. "The moon runs away, but imagine if a man each day should have to try to kill the sun. We were born lucky," he thought. Then he was sorry for the great fish that had nothing to eat, and his determination to kill him never relaxed in his sorrow for him. How many people will he feed, he thought, but are they worthy to eat him? No, of course not. There is no one worthy of eating him from the manner of his behavior and his great dignity. I do not understand these things, he thought, but it is good that we do not have to try to kill the sun or the moon or the stars. It is enough to live on the sea and kill our true brothers. I just love that passage because I feel like you can look at I read it and then I went back over it and I feel like you can look at it backwards and forwards in an interesting way. To me, it seems like he sees the fish as an equal. He sees him as a brother. That's that line there that it's enough to live on the sea and kill our true brothers.
Yeah.
And
And
whereas yeah, go ahead.
that's very interesting because, um, especially since Hemingway had seen a lot of war where
Mm.
brothers are killing brothers, civil war,
Mhm.
and so that right there, if you have that context, that is what's happening with he considers the fish a brother, and
Mhm.
it's very similar to that kind of civil war, whereas the stars and all that the signs still go on no matter what, and there they are on Earth killing each other.
Yeah, and the sun yeah, I love that whole entire passage, and the sun I love that the moon runs away, because it's always passing, and
Yeah,
the sun and the moon and the stars, those are much greater in a way than man who is going to pass away, uh,
yeah,
and so, or at least in a shorter span of time, and and yet it's just amazing to me because I think what you said about Civil War because I think so much of this book is about seeing your opposition with respect and
Mhm.
with love and with dignity. And so maybe he was also seeing that when it comes to Civil War. I'm not sure. I don't know what his views were on war, but
yeah, maybe. It's yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure about that either, but he definitely tries to get that across here,
Mhm.
as having that respect for the one that you are trying to kill and is trying to kill you at the same time. Um, yeah, he definitely gets that part of it across, and I wonder if that's because he's much older by the time he writes this, and I wonder if that's his views on war had kind of marinated over time, and he had, I wonder if he had any kind of change of heart or anything like that. I'm not sure, but because I don't really remember a lot from For
Yeah.
Whom the Bell Tolls, which is about the Spanish Civil War. But from what I little I do remember, he definitely portrayed both sides in that book, and so you got the full story of what he was trying to say there, and there definitely was some exploration on brother fighting brother and the respect that they have for each other, and I think that really comes across here as the fish as a metaphor for that. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, there's a line here. It says, let's see, you did not kill the fish only to keep alive and to sell food, he thought. You killed him for pride and because you are a fisherman. You loved him when he was alive and you loved him after. If you love him, it is not a sin to kill him, or is it more? Or is it more? You think too much, old man. So, yeah, he's very much he's very he questions a lot of what he's doing and whether he did it in self-defense, whether it was the right thing to do. And I have to say, how did you feel when he actually did kill the fish? Had that how did you respond to that?
um, I mean, I, f- I felt it as a part of the next logical step he had to take. So he had to do it. It was kind of bittersweet in a way, um, but there was no way he was backing out of that at that point. He was going to kill the fish, or the fish was going to kill him. And what was more heartbreaking to me was the sharks later.
Yeah. I was actually more heartbroken broken by him having to kill the fish, like, when he actually stabbed the fish. It
Yeah.
just and I think that's where that passage I was just reading from, I think that was after that because he's
Ah,
still feeling a little bit conflicted about what he did and why he did it and trying to rationalize it. And there was even a line somewhere about when he ties the fish next to the skiff and he starts to
yep.
try to move on. And he even wonders at one point if the fish is leading the boat. Maybe it's helping him out in some way. But it was sad though about the sharks for sure.
Yeah. That was almost like a tearing apart of everything that he was trying to believe,
Mm,
you know,
yeah.
and because they're tearing chunks off of the fish, and it's those sharks almost seem akin to the unworthiness of the people who were going to eat the fish, like he mentioned before, you
Yeah.
know, because he
Oh.
mentioned that the fish isn't like the people aren't worthy enough for him
Mhm.
when he brings it back for food. And so those sharks are like the ultimate example of the unworthiness of that
Mm.
fish getting eaten, and I really liked how that panned out. I'm not so
Yeah.
sure you can fight sharks like that, but
I was wondering that. It did seem to yes, there seemed to
but
be a few stretches here and there.
yeah, a little stretchy, but I suspended my disbelief.
Yes.
that was my
Mhm.
that was my fantasy part of the story.
Yeah, that's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
Um, and tying right into that, I think the line I have here is pretty close to the one you just said. But I think he was talking about killing and
Mhm.
religion at the same time, where he says, "I have no understanding of it, and I am not sure that I believe in it. Perhaps it is a sin to kill the fish. I suppose it was, even though I did it to keep me alive and feed many people. But then everything is a sin. Do not think about sin. It is much too late for that, and there are people who are paid to do it. Let them think about it. You were born to be a fisherman, as a fish was born to be a fish. San Pedro was a fisherman, as was the father of the great DiMaggio." Um, and I love that kind of view of religion from the viewpoint of the working man rather than like a stuffy intellectual view. which I know Hemingway was against that kind of intellectualism. So
Oh.
I think that kind of working man viewpoint um, kind of fits what he was trying to get across here.
Yeah, no, I like that too, and it's funny because even though we're talking about Christianity in this book, my mind went to, like, the concept of dharma and somebody who's living his dharma. He's a fisherman, and he's gonna be true to that, and
Mm.
I liked that part. I liked that he was so true to what he felt his
Yeah, yeah,
identity was and his purpose was.
yeah. And I like how the yeah, I like how he's like, let the ones who are supposed to think about this stuff think about it. I'm not going to think
Mm.
about it.
Let's know, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And it was a part earlier too where he also said where he was on the sea a lot, and he would say, should I say prayers now? No, I don't have time. And then he would move on, and then there was one time where he said a prayer, and he was
Yes.
like, I feel much better, but I'm suffering exactly as much, or perhaps a little more. and and I thought that was just that was funny how that kept coming up as he was, you know, on this journey to
Yeah, he was struggling a lot. I mean, his hands, I don't know if he was arthritic, but they kept on cramping up,
yeah,
and he was trying to just survive, forcing himself to eat food that wasn't very palatable without salt and lime. And it just sounded like a daily struggle. It was difficult. And I felt for him when he kept on collapsing. When he finally made it to shore, I was wondering if at one point he wasn't going to make it to his hut.
yeah, right. Yeah. And and I think that kind of emphasized that loneliness part because they got to the point where he's personifying his hand, like yelling at it
Oh,
as if
I
it's a real
know.
person,
That's true. Yeah, that's
And
true.
I
Yeah.
think that also emphasized his need for the boy to be with him, and his loneliness out there on the sea, as he kind of personified. And that's I think that also ties into how he was making the fish that equal worthy opponent too. I think that all
Mhm.
ties together.
That's
Um,
true. Yeah. He definitely held on to his thought of the boy and felt like he needed the boy. I think the boy, even just the thought of the boy was important to him.
mhm,
It was an important figure.
yeah, and it ended up being relevant
Mhm.
because when he does finally return, the boy's the one who gets him. He's there taking care of him.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that was rather sweet. I thought that was a, a pretty good a pretty good finish as far as that goes.
Yeah. Yeah. It was nice that the people actually got to see the skeleton and measure it out at
Yeah,
the end, even though there was nothing left of it. At least they got to
right.
know that it was some symbol of what this man
Yep.
achieved.
A symbol of yeah, a symbol. It's kind of symbolic of the struggle, um,
Mhm.
but also symbolic of it was also kind of like did all this struggling, but all he got out of it was the recognition. There
Mm.
was no practical purpose anymore because there was nothing left of the fish, and that's kind of bittersweet there.
I guess the one hopeful way you can look at the story, though, is that there's always the boy, and the boy is influenced and still young, and there's still so much life.
Yeah.
So it's all, it's not completely in vain. I think it's
Mm.
still there's still something that will live on because of that. That
Yeah.
spirit touched that boy.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. That's a good point, and that it definitely would give him a not only a sense of inspiration, but the pride and knowledge going forward.
Yeah,
I think, yeah.
yeah.
It was so how does Hemingway's style here like compare or contrast to like some of the other authors we've read?
That's a good question. I mean, I think you described it very well, that it's very succinct and still drives you forward. Um, I think that obviously he he says a lot without having to over explain things, like you
Mm.
said. Like there's a lot of subtext there. At the same time, I did feel there was some repetition, and I think that makes sense given the kind of journey that this old man is on. And there's a lot of symbolism. There's a lot of symbolism there, and there's a lot of metaphor there too. So I think there's a lot there without having to be verbose. What do
Right.
you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think he manages to say a lot with a little,
Mhm.
and I like that. I kind of like that about it. And uh, this, it's like I kind of wish that this book would have been shorter
Mm.
in a similar way, because this I thought was the perfect length for what he was trying to get across. And so I was like, and there's there's some times where you want more out of a description, and you want more out of the prose. And like when we're reading Janie Wirtz and stuff like that, it's like she's not wasting any words, but her books are a lot longer, but she's also putting so much into it, every single one. And but I think his style is completely different in that he's writing he's only writing very short sentences and using those words to just convey meaning as a metaphor for some other stuff. And he does it good, you know.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm certainly not an expert on Hemingway, and this was my first um, Hemingway book, but I can see what
Yeah.
I can see that he was very influential for what he did as far as like this very succinct style with while still adding a lot of literary value to what he's saying. So
Yeah. Excellent. Anything else you would like to add as far as this story goes?
um I'm not sure I can think of anything off the top of my head. I'm sure there's more that we probably didn't cover,
Sure. Yeah.
but I'm very grateful to have talked about this book with you. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and I'll put a link to your channel below. And for everybody else out there, thank you so much for watching. And as always, be good to each other.